Welcome to episode 21 of More Than Just Maps. I'm your host, Ollie Powers. This podcast was created with the intent to help anyone in the GIS field get from where they are now to where they want to be that your first job, a career move, or just improving your GIS game overall. On this week's episode, I have the pleasure of speaking with Chris Wayne of Directions Magazine. Chris has held many titles over the years, from archaeologist, professor, GIS specialist, author, and even voice actor. These days, he goes by geographer. We chat about the non-linear path his career has taken, starting from his 12-year stint at Crater Lake National Park, where he rebuilt the GIS system from the ground up, to these days where he runs his own GIS consulting business, helping small companies and nonprofits solve their problems with maps. And now for part one of my interview with Chris Wayne. Welcome to More Than Just Maps. I'm here today with Chris Wayne, geographer with Mazama Mapping. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So for those who are wondering why we have somebody with the title geographer, well, obviously GIS and geography go together. But Chris, let's dive into your background, how you do GIS, you understand. You're in the industry, but you've gone with title geographer for now. But I think you've had a lot of titles since you started.
I have.
Do you want to take us back to the beginning, how everything all started?
Certainly, I'll start kind of most recently, and then we'll flip back to the beginning, if that's okay.
Sure, yeah.
2018, I retired from the National Park Service at Crater Lake National Park. Highly recommended if you want to visit, for everyone. It's in Oregon, Southern Oregon. And I was the GIS specialist there for 12 and a half years. Well, more accurately, 12 years, 4 months, and 14 days. Not that I was counting.
No.
That was a really formative experience. It was the second time I had built a GIS program from the ground up. And actually, I should qualify that. I didn't build it, I rebuilt it. GIS program at Crater Lake National Park had been abandoned for about 6 years. So when I came in, all of the software was outdated, all of the hardware was outdated.
Okay, so the national or the Park Service isn't on a centralized system. Each park is responsible for their own then.
Essentially, there are centralized data standards, but unlike a lot of federal agencies, the Park Service, if you look at a map of national park lands, it's a lot of islands.
Okay.
Map of the U.S. So there is a little bit of standardization, but no, every park is pretty much on their own. Some parks do not have any GIS capacity at all. Alaska is an excellent example. Alaska's, their parklands are enormous. So everything is pretty much done out of the regional office in Anchorage. And then I could go on about the Park Service organization, but I won't.
We might dig into that in a little bit.
Yeah, that could be a podcast in itself. So after I retired from there, I decided to continue what I'd done before I'd worked for the Park Service, which was GIS consulting. So I'd done work for community organizations and done some consulting for the Park Service as well. And now most of my time is spent writing about GIS for Directions Magazine. Then I also do some travel writing for other publications as well. But where it all began was at DePaul University, which is a very small school outside of Indianapolis, Indiana. And before that, in my senior year, I had two fantastic teachers, Mrs. Burns and Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Burns was my English teacher and really encouraged my writing. And then Mr. Peterson was a physiology teacher. And just, again, both fantastic teachers. So after taking Mr. Peterson's physiology class, I decided that I wanted to be a doctor. So I went to DePaul University and signed up as a biology major. And as soon as I saw the organic chemistry textbook and saw my fellow student struggling with organic chemistry, I turned and fled. And actually,
that kind of sounds like me with radiation physics.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. I had started school trying to get into radiation therapy. Took my first radiation physics class and was like, nope.
Wow. So then I did a complete 180 and decided I wanted to write the great American novel. So I became an English composition major. I did okay with that, but the school wasn't for me, so I transferred to Indiana University, which is then the town that I grew up in. Started or continued the English composition major for a couple of years and realized I just didn't have the discipline and nor the talent for writing fiction. So after my last class that semester, I was panned. My story was universally panned by all of my fellow students. And I realized this isn't the career for me. So I went down and sat by Jordan Creek and thought about, what do I really want to do? And
the ultimate question.
Right. Yeah, really what I want to do. And I figured after I graduate, I don't want to go to graduate school right away. I want to get paid to travel. Okay, so how can I do that? I already had a minor in anthropology. So I figured, okay, I can, with field school and 2 more years, I can get a major in anthropology and become an archaeologist, which is what I did. I went to the registrar that afternoon, changed my major, then came out with a major in anthropology with an emphasis in archaeology, and spent the next 7 years traveling around the US and the world as an archaeologist. But again, it was one of those things of realizing what you're not good at. And I was okay at archaeology. I liked the digging part, but I wasn't meticulous enough to keep all the detailed records. I wasn't patient enough to do a lot of the work that's involved. I liked digging. I liked finding stuff. I loved traveling, but I also didn't like looking for a job every 6 months.
Yeah, and before I got into the GIS industry and met the number of archaeologists that I've now met, I think my idea of what archaeology was is more of what you're going to see in the movies, where like Indiana Jones kind of thing, right? That is not what archaeology is like.
No.
For I'm going to say 99% of people who are archaeologists. And now that I know more archaeologists, I understand what your day-to-day is. So you were kind of just going from job site to job site. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And that was great. I worked in, West Virginia, Alaska, California, Oregon, Arizona, Ohio, probably miss Egypt.
Okay, now that one sounds like fun.
Well, it wasn't.
Was it more fun than what we would do here, or?
Egypt was more of tourism. There's probably a few in there that I'm missing. But it was a very formative time in life, and I saw things that I would never have seen otherwise. But what I did realize is that I was good at making site maps. And this was in the early 90s. So optical transits, were more ubiquitous than laser transits, but they were starting to come in there. We were making hand maps, but we were also starting to do things on the computer.
Okay.
And I thought, I'm good at this. I really liked reading landscapes. So I decided to go to Oregon State University for a master's in geography. Initially, my plan was to become a hydrologist because I really loved physical landscapes and geomorphological processes. I started realizing that, and this is somewhat mercenary, there weren't a whole lot of jobs in that without a PhD to be a hydrologist.
Yeah.
And they were saying, okay, you have to take calculus to understand hydrology, and math is not my thing. But then this is also at the time, this was in 1995 when I started, that this thing called GIS was coming out. It's like, wow, it's maps. And there seemed to be a lot of jobs out there for GIS specialists. So I switched majors, switch emphasis, I should say, into technical geography at OSU. Then I completed my master's there. Before I completed it, though, I actually had a job, and it was one of the most exciting jobs I'd ever had. It was with a regional government agency. It was called the Umpqua Regional Council of Governments in Roseburg, Oregon. And this was literally building the program from the ground up. They had a grant. They were a grant-funded organization. And sadly, they're no longer around. It was great while it lasted, let's put it that way. But ArcView 3 was still in the shrink wrap. The computers hadn't even been, Windows hadn't even been installed on them. We had no data. And it was, okay, this is what the grant is for. These are the ultimate goals. And I needed to build the program from scratch. One of the takeaways from that and from all of my positive experiences is the importance of finding good mentors. Without disparaging them, I didn't have that when I was in graduate school. And they made that clear. You're on your own. Okay, you go out and figure it out. At the Council of Governments, I had two fantastic mentors who really guided me along. They didn't know GIS, but they knew how to build people.
That right there is also a very important skill. Probably not so much for people who are first getting into industry, but if you're advanced in your career, learning how to help those who are still early is incredibly valuable. For those of us who need the mentorship, and also just the more you can build people within your organization, the better off your organization is going to be.
Absolutely. And seek out good mentors. Know how to do that, because there are some people who will just cut you loose, which is okay. It's sink or swim, and that's a good way to learn as well. But finding those good mentors, being respectful. What I tell a lot of my students is when you go to conferences, don't be humble, but be respectful. And I've never known a colleague who was at a conference who has turned away a student. Wait patiently until the conversation is done. If you're waiting, wait your turn, but have some good questions to ask. Have 2 or 3, 4 really thoughtful questions to ask someone. And people are always glad to share. So for the emerging professionals, that's what I always advise them. And just keep your ears open. There's a reason why we have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
And I would add to that, don't stop at 1. Find as many as you can, simply because nobody's perfect, and you'll find people who are really good at specific things, but they might be terrible at others. Learn from them the things that they are fantastic at. And find as many people as you can. The more you can learn, the better off you're going to be.
Sure. And if you talk to 3 different people, you may get 3 different answers to the same question.
Exactly. And they could all be correct. It's not necessarily one person's right and the other people are wrong. It's just there's different ways to go about the same things.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. So then where were we? So I was working for the Umpqua Regional Council of Governments, and then in rural Oregon, beautiful place. And then it was time I did my graduate school at Oregon State. My wife followed me there, and then now it was her turn. So she chose University of Washington in Seattle. So very different from living in the woods on 17 acres in the woods to living in a basement apartment.
Oh gosh, yeah.
In an urban area. Seattle's beautiful.
totally different.
And before I even arrived there, I had 2 jobs already, part-time jobs, both GIS jobs. One was a GIS instructor at a for-profit college, and the other was a part-time job at another council of governments doing, basically I was building a brand new database of all the parks and green spaces in the Tri-County area, so the greater Seattle area. And that was another one of those exciting things where, okay, there's nothing for you here. You got to start. You got to mine all the data that's out there. And Seattle and Washington have a really, at that point, this was 2000, 1999, 2000, still had a pretty good data set, but it was scattered all over. So I had to call different counties, different cities, and get their data and then build a data schema. We're still in the ArcView 3 days, so it was a lot of import into Excel, export to a DBF, spatial joins, things like that. But that was really fun as well. And then I was still looking for full-time work and interviewed at Esri with their Olympia office and came on as a technical marketing analyst, is what my business card said.
So what does that actually mean?
Okay, so what that means is my main job was to go out with salespeople. So they had the actual salespeople who were marketing the software, selling the software, and then I would do demos of the software, whatever software we were pitching at the time.
All right, so you were the actual brains behind the sale.
Not behind the sale. I was the technical part of it.
Okay.
I don't know anything about sales but so I worked with the sales representatives to figure out what the audience was. So it might be the Border Patrol in Haber, Montana. Okay, so we need to show them, we're trying to sell them ArcView. So we need to put together a demo that shows how ArcView could be applied for Border Patrol operations. Or it might be geologists in Utah. Gosh, I'm trying to think. I did a lot of stuff. So it was a great way to just learn the breadth of how GIS can be applied to just about anything. So the salespeople would find the clients, and then I'd work with them to build a demo that would show them how awesome GIS is and how it could solve their problems. So when I'd meet people, I had traveled a lot. So sometimes when I meet people on planes, like, what do you do? And I'm like, well, I'm a traveling salesman. But that wasn't really the case. If they expressed any interest, like, I help people solve problems with maps.
Yeah.
And that's really what it was about. So that was a great experience. I did that for about 2 years and met a lot of contacts and saw, again, like with archaeology, I saw a lot of the country, a lot of places I never would have seen at all had I not been in that position. And also just, it kept my mind active about how GIS and geospatial technology can be applied to just about any problem. It may not solve the problem, but it can still be applied to it.
Yeah, I know when I was first getting into geography and GIS and I tell people I'm going in geography and they go, oh, what country is this? What country is this? What's the flag of this place? And I'm like, I don't know. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what I'm doing. And then I tell them more about the GIS side because I started taking more GIS classes and they kept being like, well, what are you going to do? Like, you can only, the world's already mapped. What else are you going to do? And nobody realizes, okay, the physical world is mapped. There are so many things that are still not mapped, or we have the data for them, but it hasn't been analyzed yet. And nobody realizes just how many industries you can use this in. Everybody thinks you're just going to be in geography. No, you're not just in geography. You're in everything.
Well, the world is dynamic too. That's what I tell people. One of my colleagues at Crater Lake asked me that. It's like, well, I don't mean any offense, but hasn't everything been mapped? I said, well, what happened last summer? We had fires.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of fires. And that is another, let's see, where are we chronologically? So
We're still Esri.
Okay, so Esri. And then my wife was offered a permanent job at Crater Lake National Park down here in Southern Oregon. And we knew that we always wanted to be in Southern Oregon. She's from upstate New York. I'm from Indiana. And we met in Southern Oregon. And we've always been drawn here. So it was, okay, she has the permanent job with the federal government. We can't be, and Esri tried to set up a situation where I could work remotely, but it just wouldn't work. We're so far away. This is a very rural area where we are right now. So I decided to take the plunge and go into consulting. So GIS consulting. And I worked as a subcontractor with a GIS training group. So I got, again, going back to my paid travel, got to travel all around Oregon and Washington, teaching GIS classes, did some other mapping projects, worked on a couple of fires, wildland fires.
Which are no joke. I haven't worked with that, but we had a emergency management class when I was still doing my undergrad. And they made us do a fire incident report from like a 3-day incident report without ever having seen one before. The stuff you learn doing something like that, oh my gosh, I have so much respect for anybody who works on a wildfire.
Right. Yeah, it was exciting at the time, exhausting, but because you work 16-hour shifts usually.
Yeah.
But the thing is, you're always doing something. So it's just constantly cranking out maps. And if you look at I have an article on that on Directions about what it's like to.
I did see that one. Yes.
Fire. So after doing that for a couple of years, the GIS position with the National Park Service at Crater Lake opened up, and I competed for that, got the job, and that kind of brings us back to the start of the arc.
So that's quite the arc, and I don't want to say I think a lot of people have kind of gone through similar career arcs like that, starting in one thing, finding archaeology, and gradually switching into GIS. I know when I did my grad school, we had a ton of people who were coming into it from archaeology. So it's a pretty common way.
Where was undergraduate?
So I did my cartographic and graduate work at Fleming College in Canada.
Okay. And that's interesting that there are a lot of archaeologists in the programs, because one of the things I found early on is that archaeologists were not really enthusiastic about GIS. Like,
no?
You think I would have done a lot of crossover, but no, a lot of archaeologists that I know, even that I know now, don't really get GIS. And maybe it's different.
I mean, the same thing could be said for surveyors. I think as far as surveyors go, they don't even consider GIS a profession.
No, that's another discussion unto itself.
Yeah.
But I will give a plug for Oregon Institute of Technology, because they have a fairly unique program that combines surveying and GIS. And we have some really good professors and some really talented students that are bridging that gap. And I look at when I TA for the Intro to GIS course, some of the students are geomatics majors, they're surveyors. I look at their homework and I have no idea what this means. I mean, it's calculus and all kinds of squiggly symbols, and okay, I can help you walk through the software, but ask me about a geomatics program.
Oh yeah.
Excuse me, problem. I can't tell you how to measure the Earth within a centimeter.
Well, geodesy is its own thing. I've only taken one geodesy course, and I am really glad the software does the calculations for me. That's all I can say on that.
And another lesson I've learned from my career arc, and I always tell this to the students right away, is the software. You want to learn the software, you want to come out an expert, but that's not the biggest thing. You can always learn the software. Like right now, I'm yet another career. I'm going into voice acting, and I have to learn this new software package. As long as you have the concepts down with GIS software, you can figure out how to make the software answer your question. But you have to start with that question, and you have to figure out the steps to get there. You're going to pull your hair out sometimes learning the software, but that is the easiest part, counterintuitive as that may sound. The software isn't what makes GIS. It's the tool you use to do GIS. But GIS is about the concept. It's about asking questions and figuring out how to answer those questions.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. In my previous job, before where I am now, I was helping configure software using GIS, and the software itself was not GIS software. It used GIS, but trying to teach people how to use that, it was the exact same thing. It's not hard. You just have to understand what your question is and what you're trying to answer, and that right there will help.
Right. I mean, it can be hard. It's challenging. I wouldn't say hard necessarily, but it can be very challenging to learn new software.
Mm-hmm.
It's always going to change, but having a fundamental knowledge of what an overlay is, what a network is more critical than, again, you'll eventually be able to figure out how to get the software to do it, especially with all the online resources for training there are right now. And that was one great thing about working for Esri, is we got a lot of free, really professional training during that time. And it was also a good time to be with Esri because this was, I'm not sure how far back your background GIS career goes, but it was the period when there was ArcInfo, which was the DOS program, and there was ArcView, which was the Windows program, which had just come out.
Yeah.
But most people liked ArcView better, especially people who were just getting into GIS. So then, in around 2000-ish, they merged those into what we know as ArcGIS Desktop. And that's when I was working for Esri. So there were, of course, all kinds of glitches and weird things going on with it.
Oh yeah, especially when there's something brand new like that. I guess kind of like what we're seeing with Pro. Although they are starting to get those things smoothed out more and more and more. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Join us again in a couple of weeks for part 2, where we talk about a few things like creating the need, how Chris comes up with his article ideas, and the importance of networking.